Let me tell you something about my driving. I struggle to stay within speed limits. Now, I'm sure you don't have the same problem, but let me explain what's sometimes going on in my mind when I'm driving. My speedometer is 2 miles an hour faster than the roadside measuring devices I've checked it. And I like to think that the police probably only convict you if you're doing more than 10%, say, over the limit. So that means that in a 30 mile an hour limit, I can probably drive with my speedometer showing 35 miles per hour, which is really only 33, and still get away with it. I'm not proud to confess this, but I have to admit that is how I have sometimes thought. That's what I've sold myself. Did you know that the easiest person to deceive is the person in the mirror? How many times have you sold yourself an idea that deep down you knew was bad, but you still convinced yourself to do it anyway? You knew the potential consequences, but you convinced yourself that it will be okay, even though it wasn't. How far over the line can I go without getting caught or experiencing consequences? That's the question a lot of us ask in a lot of situations. It's the kind of question that is the start of a slippery slope, and it's the wrong question because it leads on to a second question of regret. How did I get myself into this? How did I get myself into the situation where I was caught on a speed camera and now I have to do this speed awareness course and be reminded of what an extra 5 miles an hour can do to the body of a child running into the road? How did I let that happen? After seeing some wild driving in Rome, I asked an Italian which side of the road the Italians drive, and he replied with a shrug, "The shady side." And we may laugh at that, but the truth is that most of us like to drive our way through life using the principle that we know what's best. And if we're really honest, we visit the shady side more often than we would like to admit. And that's what leads to regrets. Driving's just a microcosm of the general human problem with limits. Humanity has a problem with limits. We don't like them. We wonder how unethical, immoral, or insensitive we can be and still get away with it. How long can I neglect my family, or my finances, or my health without feeling the effects? How much can I indulge in addictive behaviour without actually becoming addicted and causing an unmanageable outcome? We don't bother to ask important questions that would lead us towards a better outcome. And it can be difficult for us to discipline ourselves to ask those questions because we are impulsive or impatient, or if we're honest, we're just plain willful. And we don't want to consider all the angles. We know what we want, and we don't want anything to get in the way. And yet deep down, we know that if we just paused and asked ourselves a few simple questions, we would probably make better decisions and have fewer regrets. And this is not just about self-interest. To live lives pleasing to God, we need to examine our ways and recognise that God loves us so much that he wants us to be the best we can be. That's what this series has been about, because asking better questions leads to better decisions. If you've missed any of the talks, you can catch up at fbcnext.com. This isn't only about big decisions. Big decisions are important, yes, but small choices are also important because our smaller choices are often what lead us to forming habits. The daily choices I make are habit forming, and habits are very powerful things. They shape who we become. This week we come to the last question in our series. What is the wise thing to do? What is the wise thing to do? And that is a very challenging question, isn't it? Because in today's world we're overflowing with information and even with knowledge, but wisdom is hard to find. How do we make wise choices? In the New Testament, there are a series of letters from some of the early church leaders to encourage Christians who were living in the first century Mediterranean area. One was from a guy called Paul, writing to a group in Ephesus, who said, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil." The days are evil. What's he talking about? Well, we don't live in a morally or ethically neutral culture, do we? Think about it. When's the last time you heard or read an advertisement that encouraged you to be wise or prudent or careful or self-controlled? I'm guessing never. Are the majority of films and entertainment free from the influence of bad morality? No. We aren't going to get much help from the culture. Trustworthy friends around us may help us, but not the media or culture. Do salespeople ever suggest you go home and think it over before you make a purchase? Generally not. The gravitational pull of our culture is now, not later. Have more, not less. It's self-indulgence, not self-control. Cultural pressure does not generally move us towards being better people. That's why the Apostle Paul says the days are evil. It was true then, and it's still true now, and will probably be true in the future. And in a culture that's morally and ethically stacked against you, the wise thing is not defined by what is just legal and not exactly immoral. Doing what is wise is more than that. It's about knowing what God says is wise, not just what the regulatory limits are. There's a very strong link between wisdom and humility. Wisdom requires humility because wisdom involves asking questions, and to ask a question means admitting we don't know everything. Being willing to accept that I don't have all the answers in life forces me to a place of humility. We're not naturally humble, we're naturally self-willed, but wisdom is being willing to set that aside. One of the proverbs written by Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived apart from Jesus, says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him and he will make your paths straight." That's wise. Putting my trust in God instead of myself, submitting to God's ways and not just my own ideas, because God's ways are always wise and good. In one of the other letters in the New Testament, written by James, the brother of Jesus, he says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you." God's wisdom will be given to you if you ask him. Well, how do we recognize it? Well, later on in that letter, James says the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. So, God's wisdom is pure. That makes me ask the question, how pure are my motives in this choice I'm facing? And God's wisdom is peace-loving. Do I have peace in my heart about this choice? God's wisdom is considerate. So am I being considerate in this choice, loving my neighbour as myself? God's wisdom is submissive, meaning being willing to submit to God's will and being willing to listen to the advice of other people, recognizing that we're not just individuals, but we live in relationship. Guidance is a corporate discipline, not just an individual activity. So is my decision consistent with the right way to live that God has already made clear in his word? You see, these are some of the ways we recognize and apply the wisdom of God when we've asked him for it. And there are three perspectives you can use to apply this teaching about making wise choices. your past, your present, and your future. In the light of my past experience, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? You've probably heard the saying, those who can't remember the past are condemned to repeat it, which means that those who don't pay attention to what got them into trouble yesterday are liable to end up in the same trouble tomorrow. So knowing and admitting your weak spots is important, and avoiding them is wise. If I know that I can't eat one square of chocolate without eating the whole bar, it's unwise for me to eat the one square, because I know it will trigger a destructive compulsion in me that will end up with me putting on more weight. If I habitually binge on Netflix, or I find myself distracted and wasting hours on my phone, on social media or computer games, then I know I need something to help me put limits in place. If I've had a problem with alcohol in the past, then I need to avoid it. And if I've struggled in the past with temptations like shoplifting or pornography or something else that I know to be wrong, then I know I need accountability partners, people who I can ask to pray for me and face me up to my responsibility and support me in resisting bad choices. You see, my past experiences make a difference to the way I should choose. And my past also makes a difference to the way I respond to people. We all have painful memories of some kind, and if that memory is triggered, it can cause us to overreact because we have an emotional response from our previous pain. If you were once mugged, say, in the past, then you're more likely to be wary of people on the street. Or if you were regularly criticised as a child and someone else queries something you just said, you easily take it as a criticism. The fact the other person never intended their question to be critical doesn't count with you because you hear the question through the lens of your previous pain. Your past makes a difference. That's why it's important to understand our emotional history. It makes us more self-aware. We can learn to recognise the triggers that cause us to get angry or whatever our knee-jerk reaction tends to be. When you know yourself, you're in a much better position to perhaps pause before responding with more wisdom. That's why the past is relevant. Then our present circumstances also make a difference to what is a wise choice. For example, suppose you're feeling tired, but there's that extra bit of work you want to do. Is it better to grit your teeth and bash on, or is it wiser to rest? Well, what have you got planned tomorrow? Yes, another busy day. So, in the light of your present circumstances, to be the best you can be, which is what God wants, maybe the wise thing to do is rest and relax and accept that not everything will get done. In a world of continuous go, sometimes the wise thing to choose is slow. Or suppose you just broke up in a relationship. Would it be wrong to jump back into another one? No, not wrong. But in the light of what has just happened and the emotions trailing along behind, is it the wise thing to do? Jumping back into the dating game on the rebound is often a decision that leads to regret. In the light of your current circumstances, what is the wise thing for you to do? Probably wait a little while to allow your process of your emotions to heal before starting another relationship. You see, the proud person tries to ignore their weaknesses and just goes ahead with what they want and often ends up regretting it. Hence the expression, pride comes before a fall. But the humble person is the person who knows their weaknesses and chooses not to indulge them. You owe it to yourself to know yourself, and you owe it to the people depending on you as well. What about your future? We tell our kids that to achieve their academic targets, they need to make choices today about working hard. And we need to tell ourselves about the choices we need to make to help achieve our hopes and dreams. For example, where do you want to be financially in 5 or 10 years' time? What will it take to bring that about? If you don't have any plan or any idea, then the retailers and the lenders who care nothing about you will decide for you. You will be carried along on the whim of impulse. And what is true financially is also true relationally and professionally. Where do you want to be in the future? Try writing it down. Now, of course, we're not in total control of our future. Only God has total control. But he allows us the free will to make choices, and those choices help determine our future. So what is the wise thing to do in the light of your hopes and dreams? And is there something you're doing now that has the potential to rob you of that future you hope for? Think about what a difference this approach could make to your life. If you first asked God for his wisdom and then asked these questions of yourself and then acted on the wise choice, you would be far less likely to make bad decisions and suffer regrets. Many of us are parents, and we explain to our kids the best way to live as best we know how. And we watch with satisfaction and a smile when they do things well. And we also watch with anguish while they occasionally mess up. Do we stop loving them because of their mistakes? No. We're patient with them. We try to help them. We forgive them again and again because we love them. And that is how God is with us. Are you always going to get it right? No. Will God stop loving you? No. Will he forgive you? Yes. And just as a parent coaches their child, God continues to coach us through his word. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. When I read about Jesus in the gospel accounts of his life, I see him regularly taking time out to pause and be with God before making a wise decision. He models that. And you know, that's the hardest thing to do in all of this, just pause a moment. But it is the wise thing to do. Think of a choice you're currently facing. Might be a big decision. Might be something smaller, but still significant. Let's just pause for a moment. Here are the 6 key questions we've offered in this series. First, will this decision honour God and bless people? Secondly, am I being honest with myself? Really? Thirdly, is there any tension or hesitation in me about this choice that deserves attention? Fourthly, what story does God want me to be able to tell about this decision? Fifthly, how will my decision affect relationships? And finally, in the light of God's wisdom, what is the wise thing to do? As you think about your decision, you might want to pause this video at this point to reflect on those questions for a few minutes. And in this coming week, would you commit to pausing for a moment before making a decision or responding to something? Pausing to ask God this question, what is the wise thing to do? In the light of my past and my present circumstances and my future hopes, in the light of God's wisdom, what is the wise thing to do? That discipline of pausing and asking God and asking yourself what is the wise thing to do will save you a lot of regrets. It will save you from wishing too late that you had done something different and better, and you will make God smile.